Hey, folks.
Hey Yolanda, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Yolanda.
Hey,
New
Monique.
year, same old stuff.
That's good. Just more time.
Hopefully we can some of that same old stuff with COVID is getting a little exhausting, but
Yeah, I do
hopefully
agree.
everybody's healthy on this call. So
I agree with that 100%.
well, it looks like we've got I know that uh I know that I thought Mike was gonna be on early and then had to get off early, but maybe he's getting on later because he's got another conflict right now. So I'll go ahead and just get us started because it's 6:05 and we got a lot to get through. It looks like we've got the, the vast majority of the task force on right now. So good evening, everybody. Happy New Year. Thanks for joining us. Sorry again that we are virtual. I think, given the 7,000 cases a day that Dallas has and just kind of the state of the world COVID wise, we have direction from city management to just minimize in-person meetings to the greatest extent possible. So we've basically returned entirely to being virtual. So I apologize that we can't be in person, but it is what it is. So tonight we got a lot of the different sections to get through. I don't know if we'll get through all of it. I mean, I'd like to, but I'm not optimistic we'll get through all of it, and that's okay. But just to get started, just kind of wanted to give a few city staff updates. Monique, I know you had something if you wanted to jump on.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. Glad to see you all looking bright and healthy the beginning of this year. As you may have heard, we had our organizational merger for combining current planning with planning and urban design. Just thought I'd mention that again. We've kind of doubled our size. And as a part of that process, we had a lot of moving pieces and staff that we've moved around. And as a part of that, I'm very excited about it. I already can see benefits for really outcomes and how we engage neighborhoods. I'm leading a team called Neighborhood Planning, and we're redesigning a lot of how we engage and interact with neighborhoods and the neighborhood planning process itself. I just will share that. Hope to have a draft of that coming out early February to share with neighborhood leaders and get their input before we finalize that. And we are, in full swing with Forward Dallas. We are making sure that we have a lot of engagement. We went back and re-looked at that. So we kind of almost even paused so that we can re-look at that, making sure that we were incorporating as much of that into engagement and alignment with neighborhoods and community as possible. And also internally, how we have what our community engagement team looks like. Sad news that Joe has retired, and I know a lot of you had an opportunity to work with him, and he was very helpful in our area in particular in starting some new neighborhood organizations. So that's a change that has occurred. We are in the process of hiring 2 senior outreach specialists. So we are pushing to have those folks be bilingual if at all possible. We hope we get the candidates who are bilingual. If not, we'll be adding some resource to make sure that we can always interact bilingually as we've done in the past, as much as we possibly can. So those postings are in the works, and hopefully I'm gonna estimate we're trying to hire those folks as soon as possible. Maybe in February we might have them on board. I'm hiring 2 senior planners to add to the group that I have, which will give me a group of 6 senior planners. We're just doing all that we can internally to realign and rethink how we can deliver more efficiently, effectively for neighborhoods and for the city of Dallas.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Just briefly, I just wanted to ask that when you those postings come out for, especially for the neighborhood contacts, could you share those with us in the event that we can help
They may
you?
already be out. Let me
Okay.
check for you, and I can forward
Drop
that
it in the
to.
chat. You can just drop it in the chat.
Okay. I hope that's still open because we were pushing really hard. I hope they didn't close during Christmas, but I will look right now. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
All
Daniel,
right.
hand it back to you.
Yeah. The only other update I have on our end is 2 new members on the task force, and it looks like they're both on the call this evening. Replacing folks from neighborhood associations where, the past representative just couldn't commit time-wise, and so they rolled off, and so Councilmember West found new members. So we've got Matthew Glenn from the South Edgefield area, and then we've got Steve Hilburn from North Cliff. And so if y'all both just want to, not North Cliff, sorry, Ravinia Heights. So if y'all both just want to, introduce yourselves real quick and kind of, tell us 60 seconds about who you are and stuff, just so everybody kind of gets to know you.
Okay, I'm Steve. I'm with the Kessler Plaza in Ravinia Heights Neighborhood Association over here, off Jefferson and Hampton area, and I've been the past president for our neighborhood association a couple times, and so done a lot of work on neighborhood improvement and projects, and and was asked to take over for Mark Register. He was on this task force, and he had some conflicts come up with work, so he asked me if I could would sit in and take his place. So this is my second meeting, so everything's really new to me, and just trying to figure it all out. So you guys, you have anything else place I should read or anything I should know about? Let me know.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Thanks for being here.
Sure.
All right, Matthew, are you on? See him on the call, but there you go. Yeah.
All right, let me see if I can get my video started. Maybe not. But anyway, yeah, my name is Matthew Glenn. I have never served on any HOAs. I'm an attorney, and so I've assisted a lot of HOAs. I also, or not HOAs, neighborhood associations. I work in kind of land use, and this is all new to me as well. I'm to learn about it probably is going to help me out, and just understanding the way the government works with, homeowners and how the process goes. Let's see. I got married about 2 years ago, and we've got a baby on the way in 2 or 3 weeks. So we're all my wife and I are kind of waiting for all this, waiting for the baby to come. And I was really pushing. I told Chad that Mr. Councilman Member West that my wife would be a really good person for this role, but somehow I got chosen for this. But no, we're excited to see what happens in the neighborhood, and we're really happy to be a part of the conversation.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for that, and early congrats, and welcome aboard. Well, unless there's other major questions or comments, I'm just gonna kind of go ahead and dive into stuff so we can, keep the train rolling, because we got a lot to get through tonight. So, all right. Well, again, Happy New Year. And right now, last time we really got through the parks and open space recommendations. I think the feedback that y'all gave was excellent. Spend some time kind of massaging that to to take what y'all said, incorporate it, and so that's going to kind of find its way into the rough draft. So really tonight, and again, I don't know if we're going to get through all of it, is to go through these three different sections: land use and development, inclusive community development and quality of life, and transportation and infrastructure. Those middle two, a lot of y'all responded to the survey online. I appreciate that. That was helpful just to get feedback, and we'll go through those and kind of explain how some of those bigger buckets of recommendations we might not need to spend a lot of time on. We can just kind of spend a couple minutes on each, which I think will kind of help us just focus on the more difficult, more important stuff. So I thank you all for taking time to complete the survey. And also, I guess I should say on that, if you haven't, the link was in one of my emails. Feel free to still go in there and add to it, or you can just send me an individual email, Monique and I, and we can capture it that way. All right, so for inclusive community development and quality of life, if you remember, there's kind of four main objectives, which one's ensure neighborhood affordability through strategic policies and programs, support local minority, immigrant, and women-owned small businesses, promote local arts and culture through initiatives and dedicated physical space, and then enhance safety through improved design in the public realm, of buildings in the public realm. So we started talking about that neighborhood affordability piece at the last meeting. We ran out of time because the rec center was closing. Obviously, it's an incredibly important issue, and so I wanted to really front load the meeting to focus on that, and also go through I guess a little bit of background on how staff got to some of the recommendations that we got to, and have some of that as a background for discussion, so we can kind of talk through all the ideas and possibilities. So very generally, I think a lot of times we know in Dallas and the Metroplex that we always hear about affordable housing. There's an affordable housing shortage, but oftentimes we don't really say, well, what's the problem? So I wanted to step back and kind of start from there, just to, as a starting point. The Metroplex is booming population-wise. We're expected to add another 4 million people in the next 25 years. We've got new jobs that are being created or relocating here. And so all of that is increasing demand for housing. We're obviously building a ton of new housing in Dallas and in the region, but we're still not keeping up with the demand. So even though Dallas, I think, is the #1 or #2 city in the country for delivering new apartment units, we still have 97% occupancy in apartments in Dallas right now. So we're just not building enough supply. And there's a lot of factors into that. But that's one part of the problem. And single family homes, there's not a lot of land in Dallas for single family homes. The suburbs are building a ton. So what that's done is it's led to an increase of values for all property types, but in Dallas specifically, in established single family neighborhoods, those are seeing the biggest increases in value because people want to live in a single family home but be near amenities and be near job centers. And so Oak Cliff is one of those places where we're seeing a huge increase in valuation because there are single family homes near job centers. On top of that, we've got just construction today is so expensive because the cost of lumber, the cost of materials, labor. Right now, the Federal National Home Builders Association, you cannot build a single family home for less than $300,000 really in today's market. There are some prefabrication technologies out there, but in general, 300 grand, even without the cost of land, is really about as good as you can do. So another thing that comes up a lot is, well, what does affordable mean? So AMI, which is area median income, that is a threshold or numbers that are set by the federal government and the city. So in Dallas, 100% AMI, which would be the median income for a standard household in the city, there's different levels depending on population or number of people in the house. So that ranges from like 60 grand to in a 1-person household up to 93 grand in a 5-person household. And it keeps getting bigger as you add more people to the household. In terms of being housing cost burdened, it's typically, a typical standard is that no more than 30% of your income should go to housing, and no more than 45% of your income should go to housing and transportation. So that's kind of the standard by how we calculate affordability. And that's a federal standard. So what are some solutions? Well, we know that reducing regional demand and regional growth is not really something that the city's going to pursue. I mean, the city wants to continue growing and add jobs and expand the tax base. The region wants to keep doing that. We've got state tax policies that are pulling people in from other states. So obviously this area plan can't affect that. The city of Dallas does have a city council adopted comprehensive housing policy. And so that serves as a guide for our recommendations because it has numerous strategies that lay out what all the housing issues are and some solutions to them. And so our plan can't contradict that plan since that's a citywide council adopted plan. So it has to speak to it and kind of jive with it. But from a very high level, there's really 3 things that the city can do. We can increase housing supply with the idea that, as I said, we just need more housing units as a metroplex generally. So we can increase housing supply. The goal of that being to really focus on areas near jobs and near transit so that we minimize the burden on infrastructure so that, people are walking to work or taking transit to work and not driving an hour and a half across the metroplex. And that just aligns with our city climate policy goals, our strategic mobility plan. We can create new affordability by ensuring that in new construction that there are a percentage of units that are set aside to be dedicated as affordable, which again, that affordable is 80% AMI or less. So we're trying to target people making 80% of the area median income or less, or preserve natural affordability. And that means making sure that the existing housing stock is maintained and stays in good condition so that people can continue to live there instead of tear down and rebuild, so that whatever gets rebuilt new is going to cost more than what exists today. So those are kind of the 3 big buckets of ideas. So what does this mean for West Oak Cliff? Different areas of West Oak Cliff have different levels of household median income. I'll show that on the map here in a second. But generally across the board for the area, median income is just under $53,000 for a household of 3. So that's 70% AMI. The reason I came up with 3 is that's about the average size of a household. So it was an easy number to choose. So if we use that 70% AMI as a guide, then an average household in West Oak Cliff should spend no more than $1,300 per month on housing costs, or else they'll be housing burdened. So here's a map just kind of shows you the different census block groups, and you can kind of see the range of where some areas have higher median household incomes than others. Something else that I just kind of want to show a map of. So this is derived from DCAD data from the most recent 2021 data. They do a property desirability scoring, where it essentially looks at the neighborhood quality, the housing quality, age and condition of the home, all of those factors to give a score. And that is how your property taxes are, some of your value is derived, is what your score is. Areas that are in green are places that are housing conditions that are good quality housing stock. Yellow is medium and medium fair, and then orange and red is poor housing stock conditions. Again, so what does this mean for West Oak Cliff? Land values in West Oak Cliff, along with the rest of the area, we know they're going to go up. There's really nothing we can do to stop that. It's a market condition in the entire region. So areas in West Oak Cliff with higher median incomes, better schools, better access to transit, better amenities, those are probably going to be the areas, just the way the market typically plays itself out, those are the areas that are going to see a higher increases in valuation sooner than other areas. As the slide before I just showed with the housing conditions, a lot of homes in West Oak Cliff are in poor or fair condition. And so some of those are going to require substantial investment to bring up to, appropriate standards to be considered, good quality housing stock. Some of those probably are not financially viable to invest in repair because they're in such disrepair that it's cheaper to tear down and start over. So when we look at just housing market, when you have poor housing conditions, increasing land values, and extremely high demand, that's going to likely drive development of those properties into new homes, because people want to come in, tear down, start over, and build the house that they want. What we also know is, based off existing land values, which really, according to DCAD, range from 30 to 80,000, but our land values are selling for a lot more than that in general. On top of construction costs these days, it's going to almost be impossible to deliver a single family home in West Oak Cliff for less than $450,000. So that's, if you were to put 20% down payment on a mortgage, factor in your escrow and your insurance and all of that, you're talking $2,500 a month at least just to cover that mortgage payment. So that only becomes affordable to 130% AMI in the city of Dallas. So just kind of wanted to frame that. What does this look like? I think we know what it looks like. We see it all over Dallas, for better or for worse. Up top, you see the Mount Auburn over in East Dallas. You've got an old bungalow, which is, according to Zillow, is valued at $226,000. The house next door is valued at $800,000. In West Oak Cliff, we're beginning to see this. There's not a lot of it, but there are a few places where there have been some tear downs or some development on properties. You've got a house on the left, which is valued on Zillow at $154,000. The new house that got constructed 2 years ago is valued at $480,000.
And that's what I'm working on, Daniel. I'm working on the houses like you see on the left-hand side. I'm finishing one right now that's going to be very affordable, that I am redoing from basically almost a tear down to try to make it affordable for someone. It'll be in the 225 range. But I've seen this going on, and it's what's driving it up is it's what's hurting the people trying to buy homes is that the taxes are going up so drastically, because they do a lot of, the person with the home is $500,000 or $600,000. Just, it initially ends up hurting the people trying to buy them for, and pay the taxes on these houses. So that's what I'm finding.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of back to the buckets of things that the city of Dallas can employ to address this. We've seen this in previous presentations. One, you can create and preserve dedicated affordable units, kind of as a fail-safe, so that families that make less than a certain amount of area median income are guaranteed a place to live. You can reduce barriers to new supply, so that we just deliver more units generally. You can help households access and afford private homes in the market so that they become homeowners. That's not as much of an issue in West Oak Cliff because, it's like 90% homeowner occupied. And then 4, you can establish protections against displacement and poor housing conditions, just so we have better housing stock and safer places for people to live. Those first two, we kind of talked about this last time. Those first two, I'm going to call them offense. Those generally relate to increasing supply, whereas the latter two are defense, which is protecting existing supply and existing residents. So what are some of those strategies? Well, on the first one, there's low-income housing, tax credit housing. There's set-aside dedicated affordable units through TIF deals, tax abatements. There's Dallas Housing Authority properties. All of those would be considered dedicated affordable units. On that, something that came up is, well, this area has has a ton of set-aside dedicated units. That's actually entirely not true. This was kind of fascinating. I pulled this data from the housing department's database. I'd actually never looked at it until the last couple of weeks. there's actually only 46 dedicated set aside units to be reserved for people making, 80% AMI or less in West Oak Cliff. Those are on Illinois down here, real close to the Westmoreland Dart Station. Those expire at the end of 2025. So those 46 units make up 0.3% of all of West Oak Cliff's over 11,000 housing units. Those 46 units also are 0.1% of the city's 28,000 dedicated units. So, I mean, if we're just talking pure equity here, this area is 5% of the land area. Obviously, it doesn't have 5% of the dedicated units. Now, I don't know how many, there's something like 280,000 housing units in Dallas, so I'd have to go do that math to know what that percentage is, but just kind of wanted to frame that there's very little guaranteed affordable units in West Oak Cliff currently. So on point number 2, reduce barriers to new supply.
I'm sorry,
You
Daniel.
can, yeah, go ahead.
Going back to the other map, I just was the significance of the blue and the red. Is there a key
Different
symbol?
categories of yeah, that's a good question. Different categories of who's managing the housing. So blue is LIHTC properties. Green is affordable units that are set aside through tax increment finance deals. And then red, I believe, was DHA. I'd have to go back and double check. I can add a legend on here.
So then within the WOCAP, there's really only 2 blues. Is that right?
Well, and this one just expired at the end of
Okay.
December.
Okay.
So when I made the map, it was still live, but so it's really just this one down here on Illinois.
And that one just passed, didn't it? Is that
No, this one, this is that old, there's an older multifamily property built in the
Okay.
60s or 70s.
Okay.
It's next to, it's basically right across. I mean, I don't want to say right across. It's basically right across from the Westmoreland Dart Station, though.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Sure.
look
So
at that
reducing
map-
barriers. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, when you look at that map, one of the things is that all the affordable housing is located near some sort of heavy infrastructure, whether it's transit or industry related. So that's even just kind of another element that's led up to at least where the market is for affordable housing so far. I know if we're talking about 90% homeowner occupied single family projects, then we're trying to preserve that land use largely, then we're already setting a priority against dedicated affordable units, taking on a large thrust in the list of goals we've got.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, I mean, what this map doesn't show is if you were to zoom out and look at the entire city, Dallas got sued and lost in the Supreme Court in terms of where we were locating low-income housing tax credit housing. The vast majority of it is south of I-30. It speaks to much larger equity issues that the city is grappling with at a citywide scale. We've got a racial equity plan that is underway as we speak. That's looking at these issues from a citywide systemic standpoint. But you're right. I mean, it's been located where it has been for various reasons, mostly because land was cheap. Land is usually cheap historically near industry, and other undesirable areas. So on this reduced barriers to new supply, you can up zone so that, allow more density. You can allow more housing choice types in single family areas. You can expedite review, so it's just easier and faster and cheaper to get your approvals for development. You can provide incentives so that if you do things like add affordable units or whatever, you're getting bonuses of height or density. Those are all tools that exist. Some cities, I should say, it's illegal in Texas for us to require a certain percentage of units in new development to be set aside to be affordable. Most cities in the country our size have a threshold of 10% or 15%. San Francisco's 20%. That you have to set aside those units, full stop, no question. Texas, it's illegal. It's against the law. So that's a barrier that exists, that no matter what we do, we have to work within the realm of state law, obviously. So I just kind of wanted to put that caveat out there. In terms of helping households access and afford private homes, obviously there's programs of helping families become homeowners, such as low interest loans, down payment assistance. Those exist at the local level and at the federal level. And then establishing protections against displacement and poor housing. There's rent and eviction protections. There's, better code enforcement just to make sure that multifamily properties are up to certain standards. There's funds to rehabilitate substandard structures so that you increase the lifespan of those structures so that you just preserve what we call natural affordability longer. So that's kind of all of them on a list. So what does this mean for West Oak Cliff? Well, really the only truly effective solution is to play both offense and defense. And I say offense and defense thinking about those buckets of categories. Why? If we focus only on new supply, and that would be market rate units, as well as dedicated, even including dedicated set aside affordable units, then we're not going to have any help for people who already live in the area. Property taxes are going to keep going up. People are going to be forced to spend more on their housing because they're paying higher tax bills. That money that they would be spending on repairs or upkeep is instead going to be going to paying their mortgage or their rent. So this is going to lead to lack of investment in existing homes that were already maybe in poor condition or moderate condition. So as those homes deteriorate in condition over time, outside investors are going to look at those as opportunities to flip, to tear down, and build new housing stock, which, as I already said, it's going to be more expensive than the housing stock that exists there today just because of construction price. But if we only focus on protecting existing homeowners, market demand is going to continue to increase because there's no new supply. If we don't add any new supply in Dallas, we're going to exacerbate the problems even worse. So this is going to further escalate land values, increase property taxes, and reinforce the existing problem that exists today, while also offering no housing alternatives for existing residents or any new residents coming to the area. There's multifamily properties in West Oak Cliff. There's areas that are already entitled for that. So if somebody wanted to redevelop that into new multifamily, tear down old, build new, they're going to be building multifamily that is going to be $2,000 or more per unit, because that's just what the market rate is, and it's what construction costs are forcing, rents to be. So just kind of wanted to lay that out there, and also say that the city initiated protections against existing homeowners. It can help slow, but it's not going to stop increasing taxes. And this area plan can't freeze property taxes. That's just not something we have the authority to do through a document that's really a vision, a long range vision, for the area. It's not some sort of a county policy. So what does new supply look like? I kind of just wanted to put a price on. I just wanted to put a price on what construction of these different housing types might look like, and what that translates to into a mortgage, because I think it's just kind of helpful to see. As I said, a single family home, new construction, we're talking $450,000 a year, at least, or $2,500 a month for a mortgage. An accessory dwelling unit, you could probably build for about $100,000, maybe even cheaper. If you were to rent that out, that would probably be $700 a month. A duplex, again, there's a lot of variances in how big a duplex is, and so I'm just trying to choose a baseline here. And so I show some of these assumptions, but a duplex could sell for $350,000, a triplex or a quadplex. And the reason these prices drop not only is an economies of scale issue, but you're also dividing up the land value and reducing that tax burden by, instead of one person paying the full tax burden of a lot, you're dividing it up into 4 people paying that tax burden. So a triplex or a quadplex, you could probably sell for $200,000 to $220,000. Cottage homes, if you're talking about small cottage homes on a lot, same kind of thing. Townhomes, I think the market would likely drive these to be more expensive. You could build and construct and sell for $320,000 to $350,000. That doesn't mean that's what the market's going to deliver. That's just what I think could be done, and a developer still break even or make a profit. Market rate apartments, as I said, they're going to be $2,000 a month or more. But if you have a dedicated set aside unit, through one of the city programs, that is a rent controlled unit that is locked at $1,350 a month for a 2-bedroom unit. It's a little bit less for a 1-bedroom. It's like $1,100 or something like that. So we talk a lot about missing middle housing. I think it's kind of one of these terms that we've used some, but there's been some confusion on. This exists all over the older areas of Dallas. You see it in Oak Lawn, Old East Dallas. You see it in Oak Cliff. You see it in West Oak Cliff. I mean, there's quadplexes in North Cliff. There's duplexes in Sunset Hill. There's some of this scattered throughout. There's not a lot of it, but there's some of this that exists today. And then when we talk about mixed income housing, those are projects that are oftentimes, not always, because we're seeing as part of changes in zoning, as developers in Uptown, for instance, are asking for more height, we're saying, okay, but you've got to give us a certain percentage of your units to be affordable. So those are other examples. But these are examples of projects that the city gave money to through tax increment finance deals. You can see how many units there were and how many affordable units got delivered. It's usually 20%. That's the city requirement, is 20%. So you can kind of see that these are guaranteeing affordable housing for a 15-year period of time in a neighborhood that, for a lot of these areas, like the farmers market, aren't attainable to people who don't make 130% or something AMI or higher. So when we think about, okay, well, I don't want to scare people into thinking there's going to be multifamily coming all over West Oak Cliff. I wanted to just kind of show, well, where would you even be able to today as a developer think about putting one of these mixed income, mixed use developments on land? Thinking about economies of scale, developers have to think about construction costs, permitting, property operations. So they want large sites so that they can maximize their economic efficiencies and maximize profit. Everywhere except for Uptown and Downtown, the product type that we're seeing is, wood frame. And, Uptown and Downtown, we see concrete and steel, but everything else is, 5-story wood apartments. All of them are 150 units or more, usually, if we're talking a large multifamily building. And they're all on a site that's like 2 acres or larger in size. So this is a map that shows areas that are currently not zoned single family, that are 2 acres in size or larger, that have contiguous parcels next to each other. I should say a lot of these would require replatting. They would require rezoning. And most of them would be impacted by residential proximity slope, meaning that they would probably be capped at about 3 stories because you've got adjacencies to single family. I just say all that because these are the only places it would even be possible to build any of this. But most of these sites would really be undesirable from a developer standpoint for other reasons that I just named, because you'd have to go buy 20 properties and the process of that would become challenging and take time. So something that came up at the last meeting was Tiff Districts. So I went and had a meeting with economic development and met with the assistant director and kind of laid out, he was familiar with the West Oak Cliff plan, but kind of said, is this an area that a TIF district would make sense? I say all that to say that this entire purple area, basically up here on Davis, this is all in a TIF district. That's all the Davis Garden TIF district. So TIF districts, for folks who maybe are unfamiliar, those borrow against future property tax increase projections to pay for public investments upfront today. So if a new development's coming in, we know that it's going to lift the value of that land X amount over the next, decade or 2 decades. The city can essentially borrow against that guaranteed projection increase to say, okay, well, here you go, developer, here's $1 million to provide some sort of public benefit. Sometimes that's affordable housing. Sometimes that's streetscape improvements, burying utilities, all of those things. By state law, a TIF district in Texas can only be 30% comprised of 30% or less of the properties be residential. So really TIF districts are focused on commercial areas. If you look in West Oak Cliff, this is just a map of the zoning. There's not a lot of commercial areas. There's West Davis, which is already zoned, which already has a TIF district on it. You've got the Hampton Clarendon area and some areas down here on Illinois and Hampton. That's really kind of it in terms of large areas of contiguous commercial zoned properties. So with all those factors in mind, a TIF district really would not be feasible. It would never really generate the benefit that that we like to see out of having a large contiguous zone. Because, you know, some of those examples that exist are like Deep Ellum, the Cedars, places that there are large areas of contiguous commercially zoned properties. That said, there is something called the Neighborhood Empowerment Zone, which is the city has 9 on the books today. And essentially what those do, their goal is to increase economic development, increase social services and public safety, and or lead to the creation and or rehabilitation of affordable housing in a district. So really the idea behind these is any new improvement that gets put into, like for instance, for residential, if you had a neighborhood empowerment zone and somebody came in and said, okay, I'm going to spend $100,000 to rehabilitate some of these old homes, but I don't want to pass that tax burden on to myself or onto whoever I'm, you know, is going to be leasing the house, because then all of a sudden that extra $100,000, it doesn't become affordable anymore. The way the neighborhood empowerment zones is it freezes the tax bill at the pre-improvement rate for a period of time. I believe that period of time is 10 years, but I need to double check that. So what that does is it allows for housing stock quality to be improved, whereas at the same time, not increasing the house burdens. This can be coupled with various programs that the city has in terms of money for rehabilitation. So that's one of the strategies that the city is beginning to implement, to think about how do we improve housing stock quality without passing that tax burden on to people. So I say all that to get to our recommendations. I'll read through these. I'm sure you may have had a chance to read them. I'm just going to read through all of them right now. One, so on the offense side of the ball, it's the national championship tonight for football, so I'm talking like a coach. Leverage the Davis Garden TIF district as an opportunity to generate affordable units on the north side of West Oak Cliff. 2, utilize tax abatements through the Office of Economic Development for future mixed-use residential projects outside of that area to generate additional affordable units. That would require a developer to want to seek a tax abatement. We don't see a lot of these, so this would not likely happen or generate a whole lot of units, but it is a tool that exists. 3, leverage the proposed future redevelopment of the Hampton Station property into a mixed income, mixed use community with a certain percentage of units set aside to be affordable and guaranteed for surrounding residents. 4, consider using existing authorized hearings in Elmwood and Hampton Clarendon as a mechanism for implementing mixed income housing bonuses. So what this would essentially do is we'll give you some variances on density, whether it's height or setbacks or parking. But by doing that, you have to give us something back in return, which would be a certain, we have a sliding scale that exists. So, you know, a certain percentage of your units would have to be affordable. Again, that's not going to generate a whole lot of units either, because there's not a lot of large properties that are in those areas that people would really be going after to be seeking to build multifamily anyways. 5, use the ongoing authorized hearings in West Oak Cliff. Amend zoning to allow for missing middle housing types, such as accessory dwelling units, duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes. 6, permit accessory dwelling units to be allowed by right in all residentially zoned areas that are within a half mile of the light rail stations and a quarter mile of Jefferson Boulevard, because that's the highest frequency bus corridor in the entire system. 7, future authorized hearings and rezoning include potential rezoning, including the Hampton Station area, Tyler Vernon Station area, and the West Davis corridor. Should also explore opportunities for that mixed income housing bonus, which is essentially saying, you know, you can get a little bit more density or some variances, but you got to give us some affordable units in return. As on top of that, something that the city is exploring, but we don't have on the books yet, is essentially an expedited review for projects that are providing affordable units, so that they don't have to sit in the same line at Oak Cliff Municipal Center and wait to get processed and sit there for months. We move them to the very front of the line because we want to prioritize those projects. And then lastly, work with the City of Dallas Housing Department on the One Dallas program to implement, which would provide program participants with a menu of incentive options, including additional development rights, parking reductions, support for development review, and financial incentives in exchange for providing units on site, or paying into a fee to set aside those units in another development, or dedicating land elsewhere. This is a citywide program that has been briefed to CPC just this past week. It's something that is still getting refined, but the idea essentially is that we're prioritizing, we're trying to make it as easy on developers as possible to provide affordable units, but still get the units that we want and make the economics work. On the defensive side of the ball, work with the housing department to implement a comprehensive outreach strategy in West Oak Cliff to promote the Dallas Homebuyer Assistance Program. What that does is it helps provide money for people who are buying a home for the first time, people who qualify income-wise, in addition to having an educational programming around additional homeowner assistance programs, other federal and state programs, to make homeownership more attainable for existing residents. 2, work with City of Dallas Housing Department to find additional funding to support the homeowner and renters home improvement and preservation program and targeted rehabilitation program, to expand those programs within West Oak Cliff, in order to assist property owners to rehabilitate their homes and help stabilize and improve the existing housing stock. And again, that can be coupled with a neighborhood empowerment zone to kind of get a double bang for your buck. Encourage additional utilization of the city's title and property assistance program, targeting West Oak Cliff specifically as a specific outreach effort in that area. So that helps people, deal with issues of title. Maybe there are title issues can become expensive and legal, and so the city has programs there to help people to resolve those issues. As I mentioned, create a neighborhood empowerment zone to provide tax abatement for home repairs with the goal of helping existing homeowners improve their housing stock while minimizing tax burdens. And then lastly, work with the housing department to conduct a comprehensive outreach in West Oak Cliff to educate about property tax exemptions, including the homestead tax exemption, inherited residence exemptions, senior exemptions, and veteran exemptions. We don't currently have an education program, like an outreach effort, and it's something that we definitely need, and it's something that this plan can recommend. And we could say, we recommend you start with West Oak Cliff. That was a whole lot. I understand. So I'm going to pause and answer questions, and we can go back through slides, and I just want to have an open discussion on this.
So first thought with all this is, so are we, it seems pretty clear, but I hadn't seen it stated that about the support for accessory dwelling units, at least in terms of the functional parameters they're intended to do. So are we going to get that listed as an allowed use regulation over this zone?
So it would require a separate action. The area plan can recommend it and say, this is something that the neighborhood supports. If that is something indeed that that is included in the plan, we could say this is something the neighborhood supports. It would require city council, city plan commission, and city council to say, okay, let's go make that happen. There is consecutively going along with this area plan. There's obviously Forward Dallas for the entire city. That effort is thinking about accessory dwelling units, transit-oriented development holistically across the entire city. So it would require a separate effort because this is just an area plans don't implement policy. They just recommend policy to be implemented. But it could definitely do that. If that
Sure. I
makes
mean,
sense.
it's not the formal, pathway forward, but it gives a history of endorsements that makes it easier to get through.
Absolutely.
The fact that it's a neighborhood driven effort. But that's what I was just wondering if I hadn't seen anywhere that the priority of accessory dwelling units is, I guess, a part of the affordable housing, mechanism.
Yeah, and so I mean that same recommendation you'll find in the land use recommendations, which again I don't know if we'll have time to get there tonight, but I sent that out to everybody. I guess last week.
I'm reading through.
But in terms of when we're thinking about affordability, we're trying to think on all sides of the ball and think about accessory dwelling units are. I mean, when I was in grad school, for instance, I lived in Berkeley, California, one of the most unaffordable cities in the country. And I lived in an accessory dwelling unit, actually in the backyard of a quadplex, and my rent was $800 a month. That was affordable for me as a grad student, whereas obviously living in an apartment was not. And so, we have to think about supply strategies along with, other policies in terms of affordability for sure.
Yeah, and I think the high level of my question is just about the levels of specificity that we're at right now. So I've got other questions and other ideas, but I'll wait until other people chime in.
I have a comment, Daniel.
Yeah.
The neighborhood empowerment zone, I like that because I think that will help our current homeowners with the home repair and with freezing, I guess, was it taxes?
It freezes taxes if you make repairs.
If you make, yes.
I think you have to apply, but it definitely helps lessen the tax burden.
Yes. And what are the steps needed to, look at this and see if something like this would be, how to implement this in the West Oak Cliff?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the area plan would just make the recommendation that says, this is a priority for this area. They think it's important. Then the lead department to do that would be the housing department. I mean, I worked on this with Pam Thompson in our housing department. So she and her staff would essentially say, okay, this is a priority to identify boundaries and make sure that this makes sense. And then, they would recommend adding that into the comprehensive housing policy that's adopted by council, because they take amendments of that to council pretty often. Mm-hmm. So, they would say, okay, we're going to create a new empowerment zone. Here are the boundaries, and city council would adopt it. I mean, it would take months, if not, a year or something to get there. But this area plan gives the housing department the go ahead to say, hey, let's go make this a priority.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's worth looking at and putting it on the table.
And it has standards about those repairs. Like I'm looking at it online on the local Texas government code. And just for instance, like you have to comply with the Energy Star program and some basic Department of Energy kind of requirements.
Yeah, there are some baseline standards. And I think that along with this, and I can write that in too, is that coupled with the neighborhood empowerment zone, I think it would be important to have an education about, well, here are the tools that the city has along with that can help you. And here are the requirements that you would need to meet, things like that.
Hey, Daniel, we we were working with code compliance on a property in our neighborhood that was a nuisance property, if you want to, that's what they refer to it as, the continual code compliance issues, drug dealing, all kinds of everything you can imagine going on. And the owner applied for, who was not living there at the time, and received money from the city to fix the items that were needed to to get co-compliance, I guess, are off their back, so to speak. And then she was able to get a new roof and siding on the house from a program that the city has. Do you know about that?
Yeah, so that's actually one of these that was in here. We've got the Homeowner and Renters Home Improvement and Preservation Program, the HIP,
Yeah.
and then
Well,
the Targeted Rehabilitation
backfired.
Program, TARP. So we've got two
Yeah.
different programs that exist.
It really, I know they have to meet certain criteria, but it really backfired on us because we still have the problem with the people. And let me just, if I can play devil's advocate with you here for a second, let's just say that not everybody necessarily wants to own or maybe needs to own or should own a single family residence. I think everybody should be able to own a property, maybe townhome or condo or something where they don't have the upkeep of the exterior, the yards, the things, the roofing, things that I'm rehabbing houses right now in a lower, I guess, income area, and I'm seeing just massive amounts of code compliance issues and things that the code compliance people are trying to address. They're not getting anywhere. The people will not correct the problems, either because they don't want to or because it's financial. I don't know which one it is. Maybe both. So nothing ever gets corrected because they get tickets, but they just go up against the property. So when they sell it, they have to pay them. I think there's a lot of good housing. People could own a townhome or a condo or whatever it might be, because not everybody wants to have a yard and a roof to take care of. And I just dealing with I see the area that I'm working in, just a lot of issues from and trying to make a nicer area that will draw people in that don't make $200,000 a year, but they want to have pride and ownership. And I just see a real lingering, continuing problem with trying to get these neighborhoods just cleaned up to where it will draw people. That makes sense.
Yeah, and one of the things when we had the community-wide survey, one thing that I think it was something like 45, I'd have to go double check, something like 45% of people said that they didn't think that there were enough housing choices for them and their neighbors in West Oak Cliff. Because right now it's single family homes and single family homes. I mean, there's a few multifamily, but there's very limited multifamily in the area. And those are really just on up on Davis, a few down on Illinois, and maybe a handful of properties kind of scattered in between. So there's not a lot of alternatives besides either renting an apartment or owning a single family home, and that's a factor of the zoning. So no, I think it's a point well made. I see Paul has his hand. And Steve, sorry if you're not finished, you can keep chatting. But
no, that's fine. I feel like I don't know how you can change areas where there's already a lot of mostly single family, unless you look at areas maybe down near closer to downtown where maybe you could put a large complex of nice townhomes or duplexes or something where people could own that necessarily wouldn't have all the responsibility and where they wouldn't have to, I don't know. It just seems to make it more affordable.
So I see Bob's got his hand up, and I see Paul's got his hand up. I might let Paul go first, only because he had his hand up first. But
Where do I raise my hand?
where's the hand button?
Y'all can go first. I'm okay. I want to listen anyway. I'm really more concerned about listening than saying anything. So let me listen to Bob and Alonda first, and I'll say something.
I think you can raise your hand next to your name on participants, Yolanda. By the way.
Okay, I'll do that so I can get in line.
So yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank you for all the work that you guys put into the presentation. And And when we got into the recommendations, I got to tell you, I absolutely love the defense recommendations that you put in there. I think that there, especially that neighborhood empowerment zone, yeah, I think those are the kind of things that we need in this community. I am very concerned about the offense side. And so I would, let's go back to slide 12 if we could for a second. Slide 12 shows the average household income. And our charge, my charge on this committee is to come up with a recommendation that's going to be best for West Oak Cliff. Not best for Dallas, not best for the Metroplex, but for West Oak Cliff. And every time I look up, and I get on the almighty Google and I look up sustainable, balanced, healthy communities, they all, whether it's the Congress for New Urbanism or whether it's Chula Vista City, they all come back and say that the best way to have a healthy community is to have a community with mixed income, high income, low income, middle income, all across the board. And when I look at this map, the vast, vast majority of West Oak Cliff is below the median income for the city of Dallas. It's at least 80. There's areas of that look like they're in the 50% range, with the light gray colors. And so when I'm looking at what's best for this community, I think that whether it's dedicated or not dedicated, I think we have a plethora, a huge percentage of our housing population, our housing stock is already affordable. And that the impact of that impacts the kind of retail that we are able to attract. And in your survey, our residents are saying we'd really like some better options on retail. It also impacts the kind of jobs that you can attract. We haven't delved into that, but when I was working in running the Oak Cliff Chamber, I can tell you that the North Central Texas Council of Governments would say that this is one of the areas that commutes the longest and the farthest for their jobs. And so the idea of wanting to come in and put more housing of the same income that what we have already really is going to cement into place the pattern that we have today. And if that's what we like, then we should move forward with that. I think that's a mistake. I think what we should be doing is we should be focusing on how to diversify the income, how to help those residents and those people that live here already get more income and have better housing stock. And that should be our focus, not just rubber stamping, if you will, the city's current policy in housing. And that's what I'm seeing on the offense side of this equation. The city council, from when I served in the 90s, we had a housing policy, and it has changed 4 or 5 times since then, and it's going to change again. And it doesn't really matter what we put in the plan. The city council that's in charge at that particular time is going to implement whatever policy they have. I think our charge is to come back and say, what's best for West Oak Cliff? And I think what's best for West Oak Cliff is those defensive recommendations you made, because it goes to the condition of our housing stock and the condition that our current residents and future residents are living under. And the idea of trying to attract more of the same income levels that we have currently doesn't change what we're going to attract in the terms of retail or in terms of jobs. And so that's my 2 cents worth. I would, if the committee wants to go forward and endorse, yeah, let's do the offense side. I would ask you to consider, let's set a minimum, because on the level of AMI that staff recommends, because they're going to come out and say, well, gosh, we want X percentage of your new units to be 60% or 50% of the median income. All that does is it changes the income stream for the developer when they come in. And when that income stream changes, they change something to offset it. And it is usually the construction materials that they use to make these projects with. And so I'm concerned that if we get too proactive and too aggressive trying to say, bring us as much affordable housing as you can, then we end up with a lesser product in terms of what the structures are, and they last not near as long. So I think for West Oak Cliff, we need to take a look at what it needs and what's going to help it the most, not what's going to help the Metroplex or help the city of Dallas. That's not my charge. My charge is West Oak Cliff. I already have a community that's at 70% or less of the median income. I've got retail that reflects that. I've got people that want different kind of retail. We've got to change the formula in order to get that. And so I appreciate all the work that you've done. I appreciate that the city staff is in a position where they cannot recommend anything but what the current policy is. I get that. But I think our charge on this committee is to recommend what is best for West Oak Cliff, regardless of what the current city policy is. And I think West Oak Cliff needs some diversification. If indeed we want to attract those jobs, and if indeed we want to attract the retail. So that's my spiel. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your patience.
Thanks, Bob. Thank you for those. Those are all really good points. I'm going to get out of the way of debate, but I'll call on people. I know Paul had his hand up and Yolanda had her hand up. So Paul said he ceded the floor to Yolanda. So I'll let Yolanda go first.
Thank you, Paul. Chivalry is not dead. So, in response to Bob, we, there were a number of community meetings, and there was actually a lot of pushback from the community in West Oak Cliff that felt that they were underrepresented, not part of the conversation. And so we've worked with the city staff the greater part of last year to include the community voices. And so, and I'm sorry if you didn't get a chance to attend any of those or to come to the meetings that we've had before these last couple, but it was really an important point that there is an established community here, good, bad, or indifferent, of residents, many of who own their homes and who are concerned that in this new plan and these recommendations are going to lose their homes. They're going to be priced out because of rising property taxes. And so there's a really delicate balance, and kind of going back to Steve's comment about, whom should or ought or deserve to own a home. I think we have to be really careful with that. We've got to be respectful of the people that live there. And so in that sense, I really like some of the things that I see here in terms of moving forward the programs that we do have to help homeowners be able to take care of their homes. So it's a balance, and it's not an easy conversation, and it's not one or the other. I would say I'm concerned about, again, we keep going back to this discussion about affordable housing and how the city defines it versus maybe what I heard the residents say. I didn't hear anybody say that I didn't hear anybody say they wanted more multifamily homes. I didn't really hear anybody say they wanted affordable homes that meant that they were going to get an apartment that, at a fixed rate for X amount of times. What I heard was people wanted to be able to stay in their homes. And so, I will continue, because that's my charge, is to listen to specifically the neighborhood that I'm representing and the community is. My charge is to bring forward what their desires are. And so, what I heard is not what necessarily what Bob, what your position is, in that, what we want is people is wanting that full diversification. And unfortunately, what's going to happen with that diversification is that people are going to get priced out of their homes. And so before you know it, we're not going to have a diversity of neighbors. We're going to have an entire West Oak Cliff that is now not affordable to the people that live there. And it may not be, everybody's concerned what happens to those folks, but because they are my neighbors and they are me, I don't want to be priced out of my home. And so that's our concern, right?
Well,
I just wanted to say, make sure I drive the point home, Daniel, is that nobody said wanted multifamily, you know, transit oriented, huge complexes with mixed retail. I didn't see that. And if they did, I think it was in the minority.
There
Right.
were people who said it. I would never say it was the majority, but there were people who said, I mean, there were people who said they wanted all types of housing options. I'll say that. I mean, it was not the majority of people, but when we're thinking about housing choice, you know, there were definitely people who said, yeah, I want apartments, I want townhomes. And there were a lot of people who said, I don't want apartments and I don't want townhomes. So,
Yeah.
um,
And I think that we have to continue to challenge this conversation about transit oriented housing, because I don't, you know, if I took a poll of how many people in this group have taken public transportation recently, I would be interested to know. I think it's low, and I've personally taken public transportation many times because I live 2 blocks away, and it's not for the faint of heart. I want to tell you what, we've got problems with our transit, our public transportation, that putting mixed use housing is not going to fix. It's
And there's
there are
also a problem with,
safety issues and cleanliness issues, just to name a
There-
couple.
and there's also a problem just with like what transit-oriented developments always look like. The idea of putting a higher density of places to live near transit buildings, that's a fundamental solution. But for some reason in Dallas, it always looks one way, as a giant building with a parking garage in the middle of it.
yeah.
You know, and it's like, well, there would be a lot of ways to put houses next to a train. And but I just wanted to give a commentary from my perspective. I actually hear Bob and Yolanda actually on the same side, but talking about the two opposite ends of the pendulum of a similar problem. In that you know, single family homes, rising property taxes, you know, occur through really DCAD's almost arbitrary way of deciding who's going to get new property values based upon what they see happening, you know, and so they raise property taxes based on market tractions in areas that they aren't terribly calculated with. And so the idea of rent control for affordable housing is largely about new projects. So the question is like how much of a percentage of land area or potentially new units can you know, can that rent control, those rent controlled areas actually affect the actual property values that they are within. And so if I'm looking at Daniel's diagrams where we said there are this many properties that right now would be an incentive for developers to put big buildings on, and then those would be the buildings that that would be you know, you didn't say this explicitly, but it seemed like those would be the buildings that would be most explicitly targeted for requiring dedicated affordable housing units. And so I think there's a bit of a gap between the idea of what we do with all the gray area, given that if we freeze rents on the yellow area for affordable housing requirements in the offensive category, that's not really going to help hold down property values or hold down property taxes in the rest of the area. You know, so in a way, I want what Bob's saying to happen, and I want what Yolanda's saying to happen. And I think that they're kind of two separate issues that we need to both be looking at. I think that there's got to be a way that we can help existing single family homeowners increase revenue streams or decrease costs. And I've been scratching my head about, that's why I brought up the ADU ideas right away, because to me, it's not just about density. That's an aspect. It's more about, that's a new revenue stream for existing homeowners. And I think that there's got to be a way of doing some sort of upzoning on single family districts without changing districts that allow them to increase lot coverage area, or some, you know, basically they get some perks kind of within that neighborhood empowerment zone category that allow them to stay within their single family houses, because that's long-term homeowners in this area often become or already are multi-generational. So in the idea of just, reducing the multiple mortgages within one family generation is a big aspect within West Oak Cliff. But oftentimes, it's really difficult to get through permit approvals, and we're maxed out on lot coverages and other things like that. I don't think we really want duplex allowed, because some developers have learned to crack the code on what duplexes, on how non-conducive duplexes are in a really historic single family district. So
we can write in, and the plan can make recommendations on any of this. They can make recommendations about architectural and design standards that deviate from what you're right. There are tons of examples of duplexes that if I had my way, I'd go tear down. But we can recommend what we want them. If you say, yeah, duplexes make sense, but don't make them look like this, that's okay. The area plan can say, these are the kinds of design things that we think are important that should be written into the zoning in the future, so that we don't get those bad duplexes. Just as an example.
Well, that's fair, and that may be something to do. I just think it's just one of these deals where there are, what I find that in Oak Cliff, most homeowners need is functionally a house on a lot that is between resident R 7.5 and duplex, and it doesn't exist. And that, in a way, I think that's kind of our challenge, because and I think that the empowerment zone can freeze property taxes in a way, and then also there's a way of densifying in the control of the homeowner, either with their own family or with whoever else they want to do an ADU with or something like that. So in the idea that I think we need smaller steps for how people can can maintain control of their property with rising costs across the Metroplex. So maybe there's an architectural guideline that's part of it, but I think that initially we need some parameter specific upzoning targets within single family districts.
So I see some hands. I'm going to go in the order by which they've been here. So Paul, and then Elena, and then Yolanda. Paul. All right. Well, how about Elena? And we can come back to Paul.
Okay. I'm enjoying this. I like both, all of it. My question is, from those maps, Daniel, I understood that it would take some kind of major rezoning for some large developer to come in and put in one of those big, horrible apartment complexes. Is that what I understand from just seeing this?
Yeah. So, I mean, I can kind of go through them specifically. Up on Davis, those are allowed basically by right today by the current zoning.
They're already there, right? No?
They don't exist today, but the current zoning would allow it.
Okay.
But on any of those, that would require acquiring multiple properties and combining those properties. But in these other areas that you see, the entire rest of the map, that is not allowed today.
Okay. And the other thing is, those pictures of the triplex, quadplex, and cottage homes, what was that mixed? Yeah, the missing middle. That's what I would like to see more of in Dallas. And it kind of ties in with exactly what Nick was saying. If we can get them to look good, I'm all for ADUs, and he's right. In my little Elmwood neighborhood, there are many families that are multi-generational families, and they do build onto the houses, which is great as far as I'm concerned. There should be a way to make this easier. I agree with that. I was excited to hear that we can recommend architectural guidelines. I agree too with Yolanda that we just don't, I don't think people in what the West Oak Cliff area want a huge change in, I mean, since it's mostly single families, I don't think most people want a huge change, but we do want things to get better and we want things to be nicer. And I agree, Bob. The other thing though, Bob, honestly, even though we're all in, I mean, it seemed like there was more lower income or less than AMI. That is maybe today or 2 years ago. And things are changing rapidly in Dallas. People are getting priced out, which is, that would be me too. I couldn't afford to buy the house that I'm living in right now. So I don't want that to happen. So anyway, I'm excited about the idea of specifying architectural guidelines for the appearance, but I think that we need higher density, maybe not, you know, I mean, I like the looks of the triplex and quadplexes, and I've lived in a triplex down on Ross Avenue 40 years ago. I like that addition as far as like adding diversity of housing into West Oak Cliff, as long as it fits into the existing housing stock. That's all. I'm also that the neighborhood empowerment zone, and then the other thing I wanted to say is education is key, and that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Elena. I see Paul is back, if he's back.
Yep, I'm back. Sorry, I was
Perfect.
simultaneously listening to Heritage's monthly meeting as well. So I had, yeah.
There's like 3 meetings tonight that we had to all divvy ourselves up.
Yeah, I had like an AirPod in for that one, and yeah. So I have been listening to you guys though, and as you probably unsurprisingly, I paid very close attention to the land use and zoning and everything else there. And I've listened to everyone's comments here. I'm going to start with a little kind of an example because I think it relates to a lot of the concerns that I've heard so far. And then I'll kind of add a little bit more regarding some zoning policy. So when I moved, I live in Oak Cliff, of course, but for a little bit we lived over in Old East Dallas, right? We looked at saying, okay, we wanted to buy, my wife and I wanted to buy a home. We had a young son who had a lot of medical equipment. We needed a little bit more space, but we didn't really need, a 3 or 4 bedroom home. We really only needed like 2 bedrooms, right? We really didn't even want a house. We really just needed 2 bedrooms that we could own. Well, if you go into Oak Cliff and you say, all right, I want a 2-bedroom unit with low maintenance, right? So I don't have to have a big yard. I don't have a yard or a lot of stuff to take care of and stuff. Really, there aren't any options. We couldn't do it. What we ended up actually doing is we were looking between Elmwood and where we live today in Trinity Heights. And when we bought a house where we did, but it was a 4-bedroom, 3-bath. And we didn't buy the house because we wanted a 4-bed, 3-bath. It's because it was literally the only option available to live in that area. And this kind of gets into a big issue with West Oak Cliff. It's a major weakness I think it has right now. Currently, as it stands, if you want to attract, let's say you want to bring teachers to your local elementary schools and they want to live close by, they really don't have a lot of quality housing options to stay in other than buying a house. And if they buy a house, you're basically trading one household for another. Now, some of that displacement or that pricing out is not as quote unquote price out as we might think, because since it's such a high home ownership rate here, a lot of them are cashing out with a ton of equity, right? And then choosing to move to say somewhere else, right? There in West Oak Cliff's case, there's not a lot of renter pricing out because there's not a lot of renter stock to begin with. But that's also the problem of it right now. If you said to a teacher or a pair of teachers, a starting teacher at DISD makes about $55,000. So it's not unrealistic to say, okay, well, where would 2 teachers who just met right fresh out of college, right? They would make $110,000 a year. If they wanted to live in anywhere, somewhere in West Oak Cliff and not buy a home, where would they stay? And the short answer is they'd have to go well below their means in terms of quality housing stock versus their budget to stay in West Oak Cliff, or they have to go live somewhere else. The closest place being Bishop Arts. But when you start having your professionals having to, okay, first they got to go rent somewhere else in Bishop Arts or Uptown or anywhere else to find like nice housing stock, it starts to create this cycle. Well, if you're already living there and you like where you live, right? You start wanting to try and look for jobs closer to where you live, and it makes it harder actually to retain a lot of our professionals. Think about like our officers and teachers and stuff, right? If I was like, I really want our teachers to stay local to the community, but they can't find any home in the community that's suitable for them, that's a problem. And I think that's something that I think West Oak Cliff really needs to look at in terms of you've got to find some way to add that diversity of housing stock. I think that concern of we're worried about being priced out or our taxes going up, I think that's a given no matter what you do. If you did absolutely nothing with the zoning, right? If I wanted to come to Elmwood today, you're going to have to trade me for someone else. Someone has to move so that I could move in, right? If you built something more units, whether it was townhomes or duplexes or anything really, you at least give it a chance where me wanting to move to Elmwood does not imply that someone else needs to move out. And I think that somehow, no matter whether you do it with multifamily, whether you do it with duplexes or quadplexes, you guys have got to find some way that you can feel comfortable with. And the other thing too is that for the portion of you in the southeastern portion, I think you do have to come to grips with, as Daniel has mentioned, there's a citywide policy. You are not as far from downtown as you might believe you are. If you think you are, go follow Central Expressway, follow the red line all the way up. And I'd have taken that train numerous times. My wife, who's 5'3" and barely 100 pounds, has taken those trains day in and day out with our 4-year-old son. You know, go all the way up Central Expressway and you'll see multifamily and condos and every housing type you can imagine. You also see every type of retail you can imagine too. So if we're talking about correcting the inequities of West Oak Cliff being neglected or Oak Cliff in general being neglected, you also have to correct the inequities of there literally aren't that many housing options in Oak Cliff. And while East Oak Cliff's plan, I can tell you right now, is going to pull a lot of that weight, some of that weight will have to fall a little bit on West Oak Cliff. You guys have just got to figure out how you want it to fall. But the idea that you can sit there and say, we just want to defend our single family houses and pretty much keep it as is, even if you keep it by policy defending your single family, you will keep the form, but you won't keep the function. You might have single family houses, but they won't last as affordable single family. And that's a long one, but I just want to make sure that's super, super clear.
Thanks, Paul. I think Yolanda, you're next.
I was going to just say I concur about the ADUs. I think that's a really good option. I also wanted to mention that there's actually, I'm just wondering about zoning. It's what I don't know, but I know when in all of my meanderings through, especially 75211, there are a lot of duplexes. There are a lot. So is a duplex always is a different zoning from single family?
It is.
Okay,
Yeah,
'cause-
so
Because
it
your
wouldn't
map.
be allowed by right in like R75, which is what most of Oak Cliff is, West Oak Cliff.
Okay.
It wouldn't be allowed by right. If it already existed before that zoning was in place,
Okay.
then it would be allowed by right, grandfathered in.
Gotcha. Got you. And I suppose I would ask Paul, yeah, I'm not like have a fantasy that nothing is going to change. Is your solution or your suggestion this kind of echoing what Elaine said about this missing middle housing?
I think based on what you guys have described, that sounds like the best option. The only exception where I think you need to be a little bit more aggressive is as you get closer to Westmoreland Station and Hampton Station, no one's asking y'all to become Uptown 2.0, but y'all got to do something. You
I
know,
think,
because and I say this, and I know, and everyone on this task force, right? And I know in general the community doesn't intend it that way, but as Daniel mentioned, living in Berkeley, San Francisco, suburban San Francisco, you could argue is the definition of what you got to describe, where you have vast areas that really need to densify in some form or fashion, and it is like pulling teeth, and that's being very, very generous with it, right? I mean, it's incredibly difficult for them to build significant amounts of housing in suburban San Francisco, and thus you have these 3-bedroom homes that are neither torn down or affordable. They're like $1 million, and it just that I've seen that policy. I have lived in that policy. And I can tell you right now, that's not the direction you want to go based on what you're describing. But yeah, missing middle housing is probably the best fit for y'all, with the exception of Hampton, and it's technically out of Westmoreland Station.
well, I would say that what's recommended is not like overwhelming. I mean, it's like those little, it's, I think it's that, right? No, I think actually, if you go to the map that's mostly gray with your little orange, Daniel, that's where you're recommending some more density, right? That would be apartment like.
I don't even think you need all of those sites.
Not even all of it, just some of it. Like
Okay.
this area is already allowed for that.
Exactly.
And it really would just be, and that area is already zoned for it because it's MF. So it'd really probably be up here on Davis and then right next to the Hampton Dart Station would probably be the only 2 spots that make sense.
And that one is the one that would have to be rezoned though, right? The Hampton
This
area.
would need to be rezoned. This would not.
Okay. And the other ones are already zoned in such a way?
That one is not. These 2 are not. And for a lot of reasons, I don't see those making a lot of sense because of numerous factors, market conditions. This one doesn't make a lot of sense either. These 2 today it's a half and half. Some of it is zoned correctly and some of it's not. So it would require some zoning change. But everything else, yeah, I mean, so that's a Dart owned property, and then this all right here, that's that gas station and a couple other things. So that would require rezoning.
I guess the only other thing I'd want to add is that I like this idea. Obviously, we've all sort of said we like this idea of an empowerment zone. And I guess because the other thing I'm thinking is that there needs to be an overlay for these types of neighborhoods where, again, it could be neighborhood driven. If you want to do the work to get the overlay, that's not necessarily always based 100% on architecture, because obviously we don't have this area. I know there are pockets, but again, doing a lot of block walking, a lot of our neighborhoods right now are not architecturally significant in this area. But that doesn't mean that there's not something unique that the people want to maintain, and there's got to be a way for us to do that. So it's a zone, it's an overlay creation or a neighborhood empowerment zone. But
so I would say, just as an idea, and when you were talking about just some unifying form, so I use Elmwood because it's the closest counterpart to my home neighborhood. Transit oriented, everything else, a lot of single family, although we're more density friendly. But in any case, one thing you could look at is not necessarily the style of home, right? Part of it could be just the fact that there is variety. So like in my neighborhood, for example, my house is a 1950 house. The house next to me is like built in 1910. The house next to that one was built in the 30s. The house next to that one was built 5 years ago. In general, my neighborhood generally feels that as long as you build any kind of decent quality house, we don't really care about the style so much, as long as you put some effort into the style. If anything, the one thing we don't like in our neighborhood is repeating the same style, unless it's an historic one like a Tudor or something like that. And so for us, if we were going to do, for example, a neighborhood empowerment zone, the unifying thing of our neighborhood is the variety of housing types, right? The fact that you could find, one neighbor may have a Craftsman next to a Tudor, next to, a modern, right? And we like that variety. And that might be the case for some of the neighborhoods. If any of those neighborhoods fit that bill, Elmwood is probably a pretty close fit to that. And that might be something, like an eclectic overlay. Exactly.
And you can have the overlay be less specific about architecture, as Paul was saying. Like, it doesn't have to say you have to use craftsman columns and this roof pitch and all of that, but instead shape where garages go and how, do you want porches or not? Do you want, do you want to limit the massing so that you're not getting an 8,000 square foot house on a lot, which we can do. I mean, there's a lot of different things that you can use with zoning that don't just speak to, I think when you start getting into like the window treatments and things like that, that gets real prescriptive, it gets real expensive, and the devil, and what one person likes another person might hate, and that usually creates bad neighbors because people get in an argument about what color their windows got painted. But we can have guidelines that are a little bit more general that shape the form and outcome of a building without getting into some of that architectural character.
Yeah, and in general, I mean, you can kind of guide the functional relationships you want to major city infrastructure, like a street, and so you keep the front porch community by regulating massings and, like you said, garage orientations and even structure sizes. Maybe in my advocacy, not necessarily lot coverage, but I think one of the big problems with architectural guidelines is the idea of trying to force variety on building elevations, when really what we like is multiple owners, or not owners in a general way. We like multiple stakeholders. We like more people that have a vested interest in the area in which they occupy. And so what I find is that I'm in a lot of neighborhood meetings like this. People don't necessarily mind the amount of population that a big apartment building drives. What they don't like is the fakeness of it and the transientness of the population that it requires. And so what I find is that while we can't restrict platting requirements, we can't restrict certain things that are county driven. What we can do is encourage like these things related to massings. Like, we can basically say, like, you have to have, structures have to be independent, at a maximum of X number of square feet lot coverage, for instance. So for instance, what that could mean is that most houses are 25 to 30 feet wide. And you could basically say, hypothetically, you have to, no structure can be larger than 30 by 50 before the next piece has to be completely structurally independent. And then you kind of force the Lego work. You force people like me and developers to think at the scale at which we want people to buy and operate in this area. Another one I think is really important for triplexes and quadplexes is driveways. There was no parking regulations when these buildings were built. They parked their horses and their cars the same way that the neighbor in the single family house next to them did. And so when you get into a triplex and you start getting into even like MF2 kind of designations, district designations, then you all of a sudden start to deal with commercial requirements. And that's just not good for neighborhoods. When you start dealing with commercial driveways and dedicated parking spaces, I think that there's needs to be a way that we can reestablish the alleyways. And maybe there's an incentive element to it that says, you're allowed to count driveways as parking spaces in duplexes and MF1 and MF2s. If you have the additional alley access. There's you can get alley improvements put on the bond, and those in the streets program for each bond is usually a huge amount of money. So alley projects usually go, are easy to get thrown in there. And we have, we have a lot of neighborhoods with front entry driveways with garages and working alleys, or at least could be quickly repaired to being working alleys. We have a lot of bones in this neighborhood to densify in small, healthy ways. But I think we got to find also a way on parking to keep it, site planners and public works and other places, thinking at a residential scale. And we need some creative incentive options that allow people to be able to not get frozen when they want to do a project.
And I'll just add on that real fast that, there is citywide parking code reform going on as we speak. I think, Nick, what you said about alleys is spot on, and something that I know in our department we're always thinking about, and something that, this plan could recommend. Like, if you have an alley, some streets don't have alleys, but if you have an alley, park off the alley or utilize the alley to access rear parking, things like that. This plan can absolutely say that. I think another one of those guidelines that, again, this becomes the nuance in zoning that I don't think the area plan needs to nail that down. It can paint broad brushstrokes and say, Elmwood's going to be different than Northcliffe in terms of the types of recommendations. So we could kind of make a recommendation that says, because all of these would require some sort of zoning change. And so those would each require an authorized hearing, which means that you're going to have some public engagement. So you could have a recommendation about creating a task force of people to identify those specific guidelines for that neighborhood. Just because if we try to do that for every area, this document will be 400 to 4,000 pages long, and we'll be doing this for a decade.
You can do that.
We can do general things. It's the specifics,
You'll whip that out in a week, Daniel.
I'd love to. A good example of what you were getting at, though, Nick, is so I live over in Old East Dallas, and I live next to a vacant lot. And my first thought was, well, they sure as hell better not build an ugly McMansion that's massive compared to my little bungalow next to me. But the way the zoning is written is the square footage of a new construction home can be no larger than 30% larger than the average of homes on that block face. So if every house on that block is 2,000 square feet, then the house that gets built can't be any larger than 30% larger than that, which naturally limits, and keeps the scale to be somewhat proportional, instead of some person saying, all right, well, I'm going to build a 7,000 square foot house because I can. So there are definitely ways that zoning can do that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it could be a thing where even just we in terms of encouraging by right zoning changes with, with remodeling or preserving existing structures. I don't know. I mean, so for instance, this isn't, I'm not speaking for everybody, but I would not care if somebody turned an existing house into a duplex that would right next to me. So my thought is, well, what can the area plan do to encourage, to say, well, you could maybe hypothetically get duplex by right if you kept the existing structure. Now you still have all the other requirements you got to deal with. You got to figure out how to park it. You got to figure out the kitchens, and you still got to go through all the other departmental approvals.
Well, Nick, you might mind the parking problem though. If a duplex was put in next to you, like they have some issues on single family homes where there's no parking. They got one car width driveways, and up and down the streets there's just lines of cars. That might be a problem if it was next to you and you had a duplex there.
Well, it might, but it's not. I mean, it wouldn't be. I anticipate, and this is again just personal opinion, that's going to be a natural thing. It's parking on the street will be something that ebb and flows in highly sought after areas, whether they're affordable or lucrative. So I mean, in a way, it doesn't mean that it has to be congested, but large percentages of off-street parking are not realistic for for
I
growing
think the
areas.
congestion is a real problem. All you have to do is drive down in Elmwood, which is a great neighborhood. Drive down a couple of their streets in the evening time when everybody's home. You'll see that you can only drive. There's only enough room for one car, and if you meet somebody head on, then you just have one of y'all. It's incredible how many cars there are parked on each direction on the streets there, and you cannot go through if someone's coming. It's incredible. It's
Yeah,
incredible.
and Elmwood's got some even several residential streets are even like 30 feet wide over in Elmwood, as opposed to like a standard 39 feet.
That's
Yeah,
just the main
it
Elmwood
is a problem.
Boulevard is. Yeah.
It is a problem, but I think it's one that will fluctuate, within every district. It needs to be addressed, but I just don't see it as I don't see it as a roadblock for for people doing these kinds of strategies we're talking about.
So
Maybe
just for
maybe
the
the
sake of
streets are
time,
restricted.
we're getting close to 8, and I know I don't want to keep people forever. I know Matt had his hand up, so I was going to let him talk on this topic, but I did want to spend a little bit of time just going through some of the other sections so we can make some forward progress. Some more football terminology. Sorry about that. All right, Matthew, you got the floor. Matthew?
I think you're on mute.
All right. Well, we can come back to him. I know he had his hand up for a while, so he may have slipped away. That was a really good discussion. I'm not trying to say that we stop talking about it. I know it gives staff a lot to think about. We can come back at the next meeting with kind of having built off some of that, and kind of do some refinements accordingly, and think about some of those comments about architectural standards and things like that as well. I did want to just try to dive through some of these other sections and discuss them kind of quickly, if possible, so that we can kind of get some of these sections a little bit more buttoned up for the rough draft. So the next section was support local minority, immigrant, and women-owned small businesses. And those recommendations were, one, work with Office of Economic Development to create a small-scale community development assistance program to support small-scale infill economic development opportunities. This is something that is in its very early stages. Obviously, some of you may have heard that the director of, or kind of the assistant city manager for economic development just resigned. So obviously there's a little bit of leadership influx, but this is something that there's general excitement across City Hall to create some small scale development business programs. And so this plan can speak to that. Actively promote the Office of Economic Development Small Business Adaptive Reuse Program, which provides grants for up to $30,000 for commercial building repairs and improvements. I think one of the comments, and I'll get to it in a second, was what does actively promote mean? And so I know that that's vague, and so I that's a good point. We can clean that up. I think it needs to be a comprehensive outreach effort to educate people about these programs. Actively promote the Economic Development's Small Business Continuity Fund, which provides loans and grants to small businesses adversely impacted by the pandemic. Actively promote the Southern Dallas Investment Fund to promote grant improvements to small locally owned businesses. All those things are defined in that program, by the way. And then actively promote the Office of Economic Development's public-private partnership program in targeted areas of West Oak Cliff to offset project or operational cost through a number of economic development incentives. So the comments that I got online from folks, generally strong support for these recommendations. There was a desire to ensure accountability. There was a desire to define what local business means. Those programs, since they already exist, they do have a definition of what that means. Typically it means, that the business is owned or operated by somebody in the city of Dallas. What does it mean to actively promote? I think that's a really good point. And so I think making that a little bit more task specific in terms of making it be an education effort, an education outreach effort to educate and promote those programs. And then the last question was, how do we share information about these programs to those who benefit from them? There is a lot of this information online. The city just moved. The Small Business Center used to be a branch of the Office of Economic Development. All of that is currently getting moved into its own small business department. So they're probably rebuilding the website as we speak, but a lot of this exists online already. So I can share all those resources with folks. Just wanted to talk about this for a second and take any comments or thoughts people had.
What resources do you guys have, even in terms of your own time, for these educational efforts? Within the Department of Planning.
Our department, none. I mean, I don't want to say none, but you know, our job is not to promote other departments' programs. That doesn't mean that when we do other neighborhood outreach efforts that we can't bring those materials with us to say, hey, by the way, these programs exist. That really falls on those departments to do that. But that said, you know, just like we did for one of the recommendations on the defense side for the affordability piece, was we can recommend increasing funding to promote for the housing department to promote expanding outreach and education tools. You know, I mean, that was like one of the ways we worded it was increase fund, you know, work to increase funding. We alone through this plan can't, but it could tell the council member and other council members, this is a priority, let's do this.
I mean, I wonder if some of it's maybe would be too late in the game. Sometimes some of it might be right on spot, but if planning, well, I mean, planning and building inspection are different, but I am just thinking about a checklist, you know, where it basically is just kind of an information-based thing that says, hey, are you guys aware of these programs? And it's not required that they do any of them, but it's required that they fill it out, that they're aware of it, and as a part of, I mean, a permit process would be a bad example to require it then, but I was trying to think of an example of when you would let business owners and let people doing, you know, applying for projects, you know about these programs. It's kind of a form that was kind of a gateway document for encouraging the, you know, this active promotion. You know, I mean, another aspect too is even just if active promotion even comes in the form of new neighborhood task force that have a little bit of insight or a little bit of teeth as to you know planning wise what happens in their neighborhoods, and they would be a really instrumental aspect of promoting those programs as well.
Yeah, no, those are good points. Like a small business task force or something. I could see a lot of good work that could come out of a group like that. I see Paul, I think you have your hand up unless it's a legacy hand from earlier.
Yeah, it was a legacy hand. Sorry, I'm good. I'm just listening.
Oh, no worries. Did other folks have any comments or ideas or, I guess, you know, pushback or concern on these recommendations? I'm taking that as a no.
I honestly, I don't even know what these programs say.
Yeah, I know. And, you know, I mean, I can share more information about all of these. You know, there's limited things that through land use and through an area plan that we can do to support local small businesses. But at the same time, that was something that kept coming up in the community is, you know, having support for these groups. And I do think that the small business center that the city is creating currently will be instrumental in helping long term, but short term, they have one staff member and what they're going to do is a little up in the air currently. So it's hard for me to get out in front of something that I don't know where it's going.
Well, in general, people doing residential projects and being able to get the attention of economic development is huge. I mean, that's really important.
And
Often
I guess a couple of things that just came to my mind is that if there's not a lot of city resources, what does the local community have already that maybe can be added in terms of a resource? And two, just like expanding sort of like this, affordable housing section 108 versus I get them all confused, but I know in my previous experience that could be used to apply to, say, arts organizations or artists if they fit the definition of in qualifying for affordable housing. So maybe that could be something to explore, is that these types of businesses can get written into those types of agreements and given some sort of additional access or right of first refusal to, if there are retail locations in any of these multifamily these large apartments that go up. So maybe that retail space is made available to them at a reduced rate, or maybe part of the agreement includes the need to have some sort of business incubator as one of the residents, something like that. Those are just very general, but
No, that's a good idea about the incubator space. That's something that kind of on this next one, it dovetails. So I don't want to jump too far ahead, but in this local arts and culture, we kind of get into, and so maybe there's a way to. I think that's a really good idea. So I can kind of work on that. Trying to dig into that one.
or maybe in smaller areas, like whatever happens in Elmwood or over in that little space kind of in 75211, kind of over there, Ravinia area. Maybe there are things that we could do, or even on Clarendon,
Absolutely. And I think, sometimes, the hardest thing for a small business is getting started. So, somebody might want to, sell goods or, open a restaurant, but they don't have the overhead to do that.
Yeah, and Tyler Station might also be a good model or somebody to work with.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we hadn't really talked about incentives that we would want developers over commercial property to potentially take on. I think that seems to really hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah. Well, some of this kind of dovetails pretty well into this section, which is promoting local arts and culture through initiatives and dedicated physical space. So one thing I did, this just kind of wanted to have this question out there on the online survey, was what types of cultural and arts program might the community want to see? Got some really good ideas. I've passed all of this along to the Office of Arts and Culture. They're the department at City Hall that's responsible for tons of programming. And it was honestly pretty mind-blowing to find out all of the money that they have and the resources that they have and what they're doing. Because whenever Monique and I met with them and said, hey, here's the area plan, here's where it's at, what are y'all doing in West Oak Cliff? And they said, well, we don't really have any programming. What do they want? We can start in December. And that was back in November. So we've passed all this along because, short term, it might just be utilizing Martin Weiss Park in Martin Weiss Rec Center, because it's a physical space that exists. But they were talking about having, if you're a neighborhood group and you want an artist to perform at your event, not like a artist that plays at the American Airlines Center, but if you want like a local artist to perform at your event, you can reach out to them and they'll pay for that artist. They'll find you an artist and pay for that artist to show up and attend. And I think that those are just excellent opportunities for all of the neighborhood groups to know about and tap into.
Yes, and they have like muralists, like say you wanted to do some murals at Martin Weiss Park, or set up certain kinds of classes. they will pay the artist to come and teach the class at the facility. So it's a tremendous resource that could be very culturally enriching, in summary, like on a big scale. So there's a lot that can be thought of around that.
And so, I mean, I talked about those, the opportunity at Martin Weiss Park to tap into some of those programs. And I think that can happen, pandemic willing, really quickly. Something else that they mentioned that, it would require neighborhood associations and groups reaching out to them with our assistance is cultural block parties. That was definitely something that they were, that they want to get more involved with. And so I wanted to capture that because I think that there's a great opportunity to tap into that. Something else, as Monique mentioned, is community sponsored murals and art walls. One thing that they've done is had a mural that communities painted on a truck that came and people spent the day painting, and then it drives to the next neighborhood and starts over. But if there's city facilities or private business owners that are interested in having their wall painted, they can help provide the resources to find a muralist and pay for that. And I think that that's a great asset and resource to tap into, because you can use those murals to tell the neighborhood's culture and history.
That's right. I think it's such a great way to bring all those things together that maintain some of that cultural heritage in the neighborhood, but also invigorates and brightens the neighborhood.
I already mentioned the free artists at public events. Something that we kind of I touched on the last one was, as that Hampton Dart Station property is exploring redevelopment, and that's being led by Dart, the city is going to be working with Dart as a part of that process. And I think that there's an opportunity for this plan to tell Dart, hey, this is what we'd like to see here. They're going to be interested in getting a profitable outcome on that property. So that's likely multifamily and or office or retail. But we can also say we're interested, we being y'all, are interested in, there being public community rooms that, neighborhood associations can rent for free, or maker spaces, or, anything like that. So I tried to kind of capture that as an idea of just like a community arts and culture room or event space. The Office of Arts and Culture said if that space did exist, that they could curate it and be the ones who they could have a staffer there. They could make sure that if maybe artists want to rotate their art on the wall, so it could kind of be a public gallery that local artists could use. Obviously, that's years in the future, but that's something that the Office of Arts and Culture would have the ability to be involved with. But the area plan can help inform what DART does, so that we don't miss that opportunity before it passes us by. And then the last one was on all these street reconstructions. Is there an opportunity to leverage some of the right of way to get public art? They've done it to a degree on, like a good example is in Oaklawn on Cedar Springs. When they rebuilt Cedar Springs, they installed the rainbow crosswalks. They've got a new some LGBT murals in an art wall that they installed. And so I think that there are opportunities for other projects like that, like improvements in downtown Elmwood or at Hampton Clarendon, to say, hey, we want to tap into that and have, some sort of art as part of this that tells our neighborhood story. Yolanda?
I just wanted to add something. There's a national nonprofit called Arts Space, and I just put the link in the website in the chat, but I'd like to maybe add this somewhere. It's somewhere between multifamily affordable housing and arts and culture, but it's actually a national kind of development corporation, and they actually do public-private. They put the funding together. They work with the partners to do all of the kind of the federal and just all of that housing, and then again it's focused on affordable housing for artists or creatives. So I think I would really like to see that for West Oak Cliff. I think that might be one of the most beautiful ways to marry this idea of affordable housing for our community. That's also going to kind of drive the reimagination of the neighborhood.
Yeah, that's an excellent idea. I've never heard of them, so I'll take a look at that after this
I
meeting.
think it's time for us to have something like that.
Does anybody else have any comments? General comments from the group online, supportive. There was an comment of define what initiatives means, and I think initiatives is just a catch-all word for everything I just went through. One question about how do we incentivize new developments or renovations in the area to utilize the Office of Arts and Culture? Can this go in a development checklist? That's something that would require a citywide change. But I think that an alternative to that might be that you could think about maybe, incentives or, as part of these rezoning, some of these authorized hearings, if it's something that's really a priority, it could be worked into, having to provide a list of a suite of options in any sort of new development. And, we do that a lot of times, and the streetscape must have 2 of the following 5 elements, trash can, street light, street tree, so maybe there's something like that could work itself in. I think that that's a really good idea. This question about does the Office of Arts and Culture partner with schools? I actually emailed Rhonda Ivy at the OAC on last Thursday, and I haven't heard back, so I'm working on that one. How do we entice Oak Cliff residents to take advantage of these? I mean, honestly, we just found out about them. I'll share as much information as I can with y'all. But I encourage all of y'all to share these ideas with, I encourage all of you to share these ideas with your neighborhood associations and groups so that they can take advantage of them. I explained the dedicated community art space, and I can reword that as needed to make it maybe a little bit more clear. How do we make sure that all public realm projects do this? We don't have a requirement with the city currently. Like DART has a requirement that 1% of any project budget has to be for public art. The city of Dallas doesn't have that. For these individual projects that might come out of this plan, we can make that recommendation, and then it's going to really be on the council member to push that, and then on the neighborhoods to push that to the council member and the staff to say, hey, this is a priority. And then there was lastly one about expansion of the Oak Cliff Cultural Center to serve all of Oak Cliff. The Oak Cliff Cultural Center is over on Jefferson. Obviously, trying to get a whole new cultural facility built in West Oak Cliff is probably not something that's achievable in the short term, but using the resources that the Oak Cliff Cultural Center has to expand their outreach, taking advantage of like Martin Weiss Rec Center and other community spaces is definitely something this plan can point to. And I think most of the recommendations kind of do, but just wanted to be clear on that.
Yeah, well, that was mine. And I actually worked in the Office of Cultural Affairs for 10 years. And currently serve on the Friends of the Oak Cliff Cultural Center. The Cultural Center is really small. And so I just think that because it is an Oak Cliff asset, that if this plan could lend support toward the expansion of that particular center through a public-private partnership, it would be to everybody's benefit. Definitely they want to do satellite programming, but again, having a center that really speaks to the need in Oak Cliff would be awesome.
Like your cat.
Yeah, it always happens, right? One person.
Daniel, I've got one idea to add. What about like a zoning concession or reducing barriers for business owners applying for COs that have certain zoning limitations? So curfews or any sort of prohibited uses like related to glass blowing or I don't know what, but you know, I'm thinking of zoning limitations that artists often deal with when taking nominal light industrial uses or entertainment uses and trying to go into existing single family neighborhoods. So for instance, those could be outlined or at least just generally thrusted to say those will be lifted or lightened, you know, as if your business is a part of one of these programs.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You know, I think that would welcome input. I mean, I personally don't know what some of those barriers might be. If you know an artist who's experienced this, or if, you know, I mean, if you want to work on trying to identify some of those, I mean, I'm happy to help. Sometimes like the people who experience, you know, the people are going to have the best knowledge are going to people who tried to get a CO and couldn't. And so I think that that's an excellent idea, though. It's definitely something that we should, even if it's just included in the plan to say, you know, work through the upcoming, you know, through the authorized hearings upcoming to, you know, remove barriers for these following uses. And it's just included in a list in the document. I think that that would be a big step forward.
Yeah, you let me know how specific you think it needs to be, and I can dig into it.
I say we start as specific as possible, and then we can dumb it down if we need to. Yolanda, is that a new hand? No worries. Anybody else? Any comments on this? I promise we'll wrap up soon. All right. The last one was enhanced neighborhood or enhanced safety through improved design of buildings in the public realm. So there was explore opportunities for the authorized hearings for rezoning in the focus areas to implement urban design standards such as crime prevention through environmental design. That's CEPTED, which that includes activated facades and eyes on the street. So that just means like big windows, multiple doors, entries. If it's residential, requiring, you know, like in multifamily and, you know, more urban areas, we often require direct access out to the street from a unit so that we get activated people going in and out of multiple doors instead of just the one main entrance into the building. So those are, you know, some things that can be done. Patios, spaces for restaurants, all of those things would be considered like an activated use or an activated facade. Through the aforementioned public realm design improvements from transportation and infrastructure, ensure that there's increased pedestrian and street lighting to enhance safety and visibility in all high pedestrian areas. I mean, that's kind of just a boilerplate thing, but we definitely want to make sure. There was so many people commented in our meetings about wanting to improve lighting in areas. And so I think it's really important. We're not going to get improved lighting on every street overnight, but if we focus on areas where there's a lot of people already, or there might be a lot of, you know, people, so that's near transit and near commercial spaces and parks, those kind of seem like no-brainers. So I said the same thing at future park improvements at all of the parks, enhance the lighting to increase safety and visibility, but also be mindful of neighbors just so we're not shining lights right into adjacent homes. And then the last one's about traffic calming measures, thinking about traffic calming as a way to improve safety on some key streets, including Hampton, Davis, Edgefield. I added Polk and Clarendon. We get into that more specifically in the transportation section, but I wanted to capture it as part of the neighborhood safety section because I thought it was, there's overlap there. So again, same kind of thing. Generally, there's comments for that. Support comments. I added Polk Street. There was a question, is there a way for neighborhoods or streets to have speed humps easily installed? That's something that when we get into more local residential streets, I asked about this to transportation, and they said the only way that those kind of projects happen is by numerous people filing 311 complaints. So, you know, if you and your neighborhood association are really passionate about getting the speed bump on a street, if a lot of you hit up 311 and say, this is a priority of ours, please, make this happen. They'll have to go through their process of having speed monitors go out there, counting traffic, things like that. And if there's a problem, then they'll work to install it. Ensure that one of the comments had to do with like lighting, connecting transportation hubs. I was a little confused on this comment. I don't know who this was from. I think the only real idea on this was just to improve the lighting on like sidewalks around DART stations so that people who are walking to DART at night feel comfortable. Another comment about traffic calming and lighted crosswalks at certain intersections. I think that's great. We can work those in. And then the last thing is this idea of landowners putting vacant lots to use, create some sort of method to ensure that safety on that there's safety for vacant lots and unused properties. I mean, luckily West Oak Cliff doesn't have a whole lot of vacant land compared to a lot of areas of the city. But this is an issue that is an issue all over the city, and it's something I hate to punt to the comprehensive plan. But as we went through our first round of engagement for Forward Dallas, one of the main things we heard from people was concerns about vacant land. How do we force people to, activate it or beautify it or build on it or something? So this is something that is a citywide issue, and I think is going to be best addressed at the citywide scale, but it is a priority of the comprehensive plan to speak to that and work on that, because we know it's an issue everywhere. So that was kind of it from that section. And I think that this is a good stopping point because it's 8:20 and we're all tired. So I'll just wrap up. I do want to next time get into transportation and infrastructure. I'm just going to click through all this because we're not going to spend any time on it tonight. I got some great comments from people. I do think that, we'll want to spend a little bit of time on it, but at the same time, I got really good comments. So for folks who didn't get a chance, go online to the online survey I sent all of y'all and give more comments. And then I can, refine the recommendations in the maps and we'll go from there. All right, land use and development, that's going to be a big one. We'll talk about that and the focus areas. What I will say, and all I'll spend is 1 minute on this, is the main thing that the West Oak Cliff Plan can do and will do is deliver a future land use map, which essentially would say, in these areas, this is what we the neighborhood visions this area to be. The terminology you see like residential neighborhood, neighborhood mixed use, commercial center, residential neighborhood. Those have to tie in with Forward Dallas, the comprehensive plan. So we pulled the terms from the old one. We're kind of bringing them into the 21st century a little currently at the citywide scale. But in general, those names are tied to, I don't want to say the names can't change, but the names can't change. What the color in these boxes are on the map can change, but this terminology is kind of tied to citywide stuff, so it kind of can't change. But the area plan can speak very specifically to say what that category means in West Oak Cliff or in the focus areas. I think is really the goal of that, so that like on Hampton Clarendon, neighborhood mixed use might look a little bit different than neighborhood mixed use up on West Davis, but the general idea of what we want the street to look and feel like is about the same. So we'll get into all these recommendations at the next meeting. Next steps. We need to have another task force meeting, if at all possible, by the end of the month. So I wanted to throw out 2 more Mondays and just kind of maybe get quick feedback on what people are thinking. The goal of this is to try to get a draft plan out to the public in February. So do people have an opinion on the 24th or the 31st? Anybody?
Mhm.
And I can send this out. go ahead, Yolanda, sorry.
Oh, I would say 24th, but I could probably make the 31st work. I guess my concern is that it seems like we have a lot more to go through. That I'm concerned that even with another, that we have to almost have 2 meetings in January to hope to have something before February.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And that's why on my next slide, I've got these meeting dates are not going to happen. I know I said tentative. They're, for a lot of reasons, they're not going to happen. COVID is probably the number one. I mean, we're not going to be allowed to have an in-person meeting. So, you know, my number one concern is to get a draft plan that people are comfortable with made before we go public, right? So, you know, let's try to have another meeting towards the end of the month and see where we are and then go from there is what I'd say. And, you know, if we need to have another one after that, then we'll have another one after that. You know, we'll let that drive the whole process.
Will there be a recorded version of this meeting online?
Yeah, so this meeting is recording as we speak. It usually takes a few hours to save, and then I've got to get it uploaded to YouTube. So it might not be till like Wednesday that it'll be available, but we'll get it up online. Bob, I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, I would prefer the 31st if that's helpful. Tied up on the 24th.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. And I might even, because I see some folks some folks probably are eating dinner or I talked too much and we lost them. I might send a poll out in an email following up tomorrow morning, just, you know, to try to get people to answer. It looks like 31st works for a lot of people. So, you know, we'll tentatively shoot for that one. Why don't we just go ahead and do that? And I'll confirm, you know, that Mike England can make it because I know he couldn't make it tonight last minute. And again, we'll probably have to meet virtually. We'll see where the state of the world is at and just make a decision as it gets a little closer. Yeah, so that's really it. This schedule, I just kind of wanted to show that this is going to change because, you know, we're not going to be able to present a draft until we have a draft available. But essentially the idea is once there's consensus around each of these sections, we can take a draft out to the public. You know, the idea would probably to have a virtual meeting and a public meeting, and give residents about 2 months to respond. So we'll have an online survey where people can give comments. We'll have in-person opportunities for people to give comments, just so that everybody, you know, is able to, you know, say, hey, because the last thing we'd want to do is put forward a plan and multiple neighborhood associations are concerned about, you know, and are unwilling to support certain recommendations in there. So, you know, the draft is one that obviously there's a lot of things that can change within that in terms of the recommendations. And so that's a pretty critical and important stage. So, but we can't get there until we all get all of our recommendations outlined. So that's really our task right now. I don't have anything else. That was a lot. And I appreciate everybody sticking on for 2.5 hours. Y'all are champions.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you for
Thanks,
being
Ronnie.
here this evening.
Thank you.
I guess I would
Thank you.
just share or just encourage everybody to share this information back to our groups, right? Through whatever means we do, because so that we can start getting feedback. I know I've already sent it to the West Oak Cliff Coalition and they're just now forming some response. So I just think
But they have some time to, but that's
Yeah.
great. You're already on it.
well, that way we have more time to address the issues, right?
Right.
Absolutely. And I mean, you know, for folks, I mean, I know I send these out as PDFs and stuff, but all of this is available on our website too. So, you know, you can always just kind of send people links and tell people, hey, check out all the information that's there because it's all there. Well, I really appreciate everybody's time this evening, and I hope everybody has a good rest of the week and stays healthy.
Stay safe. Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
All right.